At the beginning of the 20th century, the United States was not the center of the world. It was not the richest nation. It was not the most powerful military force. In fact, many people in Europe still saw America as a young, noisy country trying to prove itself. Yet within just a few decades, the United States would reshape the global economy, dominate world trade, and turn its currency into the backbone of international finance. This transformation changed history forever, and most people never stopped to ask how it really happened. The story begins long before America became a superpower. In the 1800s, the global system was ruled by empires. Britain sat at the top, not just because of its navy, but because of its money. The British pound was trusted everywhere. It was backed by gold, supported by trade, and enforced by military power. If you wanted to do business across borders, you used British banks and British currency. The United States, by comparison, was still finding its footing. It had land, people, and ambition, but it lacked global influence. Inside America, the economy was unstable. Banks failed often. Paper money from one state might be worthless in another. There was no strong central system holding everything together. This chaos forced Americans to think differently. They learned early that power does not only come from armies. It comes from trust. It comes from systems that work when fear is high and uncertainty is everywhere. Everything changed when the industrial age took hold. America did not invent the factory, but it perfected scale. Steel, oil, railroads, and machines transformed the country at a speed the world had never seen. While European nations were busy managing empires and wars, America focused on production. It built more. It moved faster. It learned how to turn raw resources into finished goods cheaper than anyone else. This is where the foundation of power was quietly laid. Then came a turning point that reshaped the world. World War I did not start in America, but it ended up transforming America. Europe destroyed itself. Cities were ruined. Economies collapsed. Governments borrowed heavily to survive. And where did they borrow from? The United States. While Europe burned, America produced. While others borrowed, America lent. Gold flowed into American vaults. By the end of the war, the U.S. was no longer a debtor nation. It had become the world's largest creditor. This shift mattered more than people realized at the time. Money moves power. When countries owe you, they listen to you. When they depend on your banks, they follow your rules. The dollar began to gain importance, not because it was forced on anyone, but because it was stable when others were not. Stability creates trust, and trust creates demand. If you're finding this kind of historical breakdown useful, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. On Finance Historian Time, the goal is simple. We break down money, power, and history in a way that actually makes sense, without noise or hype. Staying subscribed means you won't miss the deeper parts of this story. But America's rise was not smooth. The 1920s looked like a golden age on the surface, yet underneath, the system was fragile. Easy credit, speculation, and weak regulation pushed the economy into dangerous territory. When the crash came in 1929, it shattered confidence not just in America, but across the world. Banks collapsed. Trade froze. Millions lost their jobs. For a moment, it looked like America's rise had ended before it truly began. Here's where the story becomes even more important. Instead of retreating, the United States restructured itself. New rules were introduced. Banks were regulated. Financial systems were rebuilt with long-term stability in mind. This period taught American policymakers a painful lesson. Markets need rules to survive. Confidence is fragile, but once rebuilt correctly, it becomes incredibly powerful. Then history repeated itself, on an even larger scale. World War II devastated Europe and Asia far more than the First War. Entire economies were wiped out. Factories were destroyed. Infrastructure was gone. Once again, the United States stood apart. Its land wasn't touched. Its factories were running at full speed. Its workforce was trained and productive. By 1945, America was producing nearly half of the world's industrial output. At this moment, the world faced a choice. Either repeat the chaos of the past, or build a new system. The United States stepped forward, not just with money, but with structure. A new global financial order was designed, one where currencies were linked to the dollar. And the dollar was linked to gold. This system made the US dollar the center of global trade. Without directly controlling other nations, this was not about domination through force, it was about leadership through reliability. Countries trusted the dollar because they trusted the system behind it. American institutions were strong, its economy was deep, its political structure, while imperfect, was predictable. In a world exhausted by war, predictability was priceless, but this arrangement also gave the United States something unprecedented: the ability to run global trade using its own currency. Other nations had to earn dollars through exports or borrowing. America could issue them. This subtle advantage would shape global power for decades, and its effects are still felt today. After World War II, the United States stood at the center of a broken world. Europe needed rebuilding. Asia needed stability. Trade needed a system that people could trust again. This is where America's power quietly deepened. Instead of ruling through force, it chose to rule through finance, rules, and institutions that shaped how money moved across borders. One of the most important steps was the rebuilding of Europe. The Marshall Plan was not charity. It was strategy. The United States sent massive amounts of dollars, machines, food, and materials to help Europe recover. But those dollars came with a system. European countries used American money to buy American goods. Factories in the US stayed busy. Jobs were created. At the same time, Europe stabilized and became a strong trading partner instead of a failed continent. This created a loop where everyone depended on the dollar without being forced to use it. This is a key idea many people miss. Power works best when others choose it. The dollar became central because it solved problems. It made trade easier. It reduced uncertainty. It connected markets that were once separated by fear and instability. Banks around the world began holding dollars as reserves. Central banks trusted US debt. The dollar was no longer just America's currency. It became the world's operating system. As the Cold War began, this financial power became even more important. The United States and the Soviet Union were competing for influence, but in very different ways. The Soviet system relied on control and planning. The American system relied on markets and money flows. Countries that aligned with the US gained access to dollars, trade, and investment. Countries that didn't were often cut off from global markets. Without firing a single shot, the dollar became a geopolitical tool. At the same time, new global institutions were shaping behavior. The IMF and the World Bank were built around the dollar-based system. They offered loans, support, and stability, but also required structure and discipline. This pushed many countries to organize their economies in ways that fit into the dollar system. Again, no force was needed. Participation was voluntary, but the alternative was isolation. As decades passed, global trade expanded rapidly. Oil, shipping, insurance, commodities, and finance all began to settle in dollars. One market connected to another. If you wanted energy, you needed dollars. If you wanted global trade, you needed access to dollar-based banking. This created a deep network effect. The more people used the dollar, the more valuable it became. Then came a moment that could have ended everything. In the early 1970s, the United States faced a serious problem. It had spent heavily on war and social programs. Dollars were flowing out faster than gold was coming in. Foreign governments began questioning whether the US could still back every dollar with gold. Confidence was at risk. In 1971, the United States made a shocking move. It ended the direct link between the dollar and gold. On paper, this looked dangerous. A currency with no gold backing should lose trust. Many expected the dollar to collapse. But something very different happened. The dollar survived because trust had shifted. It was no longer about gold bars and vaults. It was about the size of the economy, the strength of institutions, and the depth of markets. More importantly, global trade was already built around the dollar. There was no easy replacement. Changing systems is costly, and the world chose stability over disruption. Around the same time, Another quiet arrangement strengthened the dollar's position. Oil-producing nations agreed to price oil in dollars. This meant that every country needed dollars to buy energy. This created constant global demand for the U.S. currency. Oil flows, trade flows, and capital flows all pointed back to the same place. This is where America's unique advantage became clear. The United States could run trade deficits without collapsing. Other countries had to earn foreign currency. America issued the currency everyone else needed. This allowed it to consume more, borrow more, and finance growth differently than any nation before it. But this power came with responsibility and risk. Financial dominance does not make a country immune to mistakes. Crises still happened. Markets still crashed. Confidence still had to be maintained. Each time the system was tested, the question was the same. Would the world still trust the dollar? Every major crisis answered that question in the same way. When fear rose, investors did not run away from the dollar. They ran toward it. U.S. markets were seen as deep, liquid, and reliable. Even when problems started in America, the dollar remained the safest place to hide. This is not because the system is perfect. It's because alternatives are weaker. Building a global currency requires more than size. It requires openness, legal systems, military protection of trade routes, and financial markets that can absorb shock. No other country has combined all of these at the same scale. As you listen to this story on Finance Historian Time, it becomes clear that America's rise was not about one decision or one moment. It was about momentum. Each crisis, each war, each restructuring pushed the dollar deeper into the global system. In the modern era, America's position as a superpower looks less dramatic, but far more complex. The factories are no longer always on American soil. The wars are often financial instead of military. And power now moves at the speed of money, not armies. Yet the dollar still sits at the center of the global system, even as cracks begin to appear. The 2008 financial crisis was one of the biggest tests of American power since World War II. The crisis started inside the United States. Banks failed. Markets froze. Trust collapsed. On the surface, this should have destroyed confidence in the dollar. But something surprising happened. As panic spread, global investors rushed into U.S. dollars and U.S. government debt. Even when the problem began at home, the dollar was still seen as the safest option. This moment revealed an uncomfortable truth about global finance. The system had become so deeply tied to the dollar that it could not function without it. International trade, debt markets, and banking all depended on dollar liquidity. When the crisis hit, the U.S. Federal Reserve became a lender not just to American banks, but to the world. Through currency swap lines, dollars were supplied globally to keep the system alive. This was power in its purest modern form. Not control through force, but control through necessity. The world needed dollars, and only one country could create them. This reinforced America's position even as its internal weaknesses became visible. After 2008, the United States used this system more openly as a tool of influence. Access to dollar-based banking became conditional. Sanctions were no longer just about trade bans. They were about cutting off access to the financial system itself. For countries targeted by these measures, it became clear that economic power could be as decisive as military power. At the same time, new challengers began to emerge. China grew into a manufacturing giant. It built infrastructure across continents. It pushed its currency into regional trade. Europe attempted to strengthen the euro as an alternative. Other nations explored digital currencies and payment systems designed to reduce dependence on the dollar. Yet none of these efforts have fully replaced it. The reason is simple but often misunderstood. A global currency is not chosen by politics alone. It is chosen by trust, scale, and flexibility. The U.S. financial system, despite its flaws, remains open. Capital can move freely. Markets are deep. Laws are predictable. These qualities matter more than headlines. This does not mean the system is unbreakable. Debt levels are high. Political divisions are visible. Global trade is changing. Confidence is not permanent. It must be maintained every day through stability and credibility. History shows that superpower status is never guaranteed. It is earned, tested, and sometimes lost. What makes the American case unique is how its power evolved. It was not built through conquest. It was built through production, lending, rebuilding, and system design. The dollar became powerful because it solved problems at the right moments in history. War, crisis, and reconstruction created openings. And America filled them with structure instead of chaos. Understanding this story matters because it explains the world we live in today. It explains why global markets react to decisions made in Washington, why crises in one country ripple everywhere, and why debates about money are really debates about power. As this story comes to an end, one question remains open. Can this system adapt to a changing world, or will history repeat itself with a new center of power? The answer is not clear yet, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this moment important. If you followed this journey from a struggling nation to a financial superpower, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. History is shaped by debate, not silence. Share this video with someone who wants to understand how money and power really work. And if you want more deep, clear stories like this, stay connected with Finance Historian Time, because understanding the past is the first step to understanding the future.